Wonderful day, wonderful day, wonderful day indeed. This is your neighborhood sensei Fouché, and I always begin my shows by first strongly suggesting, because a lot of folks don't like being told what to do, true indeed. So in forward conversation, I most emphatically implore for all of you beautiful, wonderful, self-loving, worthy individuals to stay woke. But in the process, never get all stressed out, you know what I'm saying? Make sure you take all necessary meditative practices and procedures to relax, decompress, you know what I'm saying? But always be prepared to take those notes. And I unveiled something new, which is basically my binder of notes. But before we get started into this binder of notes, which has special goodies, you know what I'm saying? And to all the regular viewers that have been following our current novel of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay C. Gibson, we're going to take a break on that for today. You know what I'm saying? But our next episode, we're going to get right back into it, which is Chapter 9, Part 2. Today is the 17th of September, 2025. And I want to give a special honor and mention in three different references. First, SIP to Trey Reed. He was a college student in Mississippi, Delta State if I am specific, and he was murdered, hung from a tree. And I'm not going to go into the complete specifics, but there's a lot of shady information that has been reported from the legal division over in that area of Mississippi. I also want to give a SIP to Corey Zakatis, who was also found murdered in Mississippi not too long after Trey Reed. And I want to give a special honor and prayers to those families. And just a very unfortunate atrocity. You know what I'm saying? I also want to give acknowledgement to all of the survivors and also give my deepest condolences to the victims at Evergreen High School in Colorado. There was a shooting 6 days ago, you know, and that's another unfortunate situation that we have going over here in the States of America, because the unification is not there. You know what I'm saying? And I prefer to give these honorable mentions, you know, as opposed to some other mentions that I don't feel as connected to, because a lot of discrepancy and prejudicial references and background that is specified in this particular person's full story. You know what I'm saying? So we ain't gonna talk about that. But what we are gonna do is get into some political references and governmental philosophies. You know, a lot of us live here in these states of America, and we hear a lot of these terms given in interviews or some form of recorded message And I'm sure a lot of us are commonly confused and just kind of following the crowd instead of itemizing the information and being most specific. And right now I am looking for my water. I had my water. There we go. There's my water. Very important stuff when you have to quench your thirst. But again, we're going to do a good amount of itemized reading to go into these specific definitions. You know, a lot of unjust political orders and laws are trying to be created, which are detrimental to what we would label freedom and liberty. And let me speak on that for a quick minute, because realistically, when we go into these specific terms of conservatism and liberalism, libertarianism, my fault, libertarianism. That's why I have these notes typed out so I don't mispronounce or mistake specific terminology, you know. But again, conservatism and libertarianism, as much as each side says that they're so extreme, or it's alleged that that specific categories individually are most extreme in these beliefs, which is true, they also embody the opposite. So as much as conservatives say they're conservative and don't want to be amongst a bunch of other individuals that don't think, believe, or live as they do, they want to be liberated from being within contact of those specific beliefs which counter their ideologies. So there's liberatism to these conservatives. And for liberals that state how anti-conservative they are, there are laws and agreements that make them conservative. Let's use this as an example. When you have a gay relationship. Now, in any relationship that's an agreed partnership, including a gay relationship, you want to have an exclusive relationship with only a specific person. No sharing. You know what I'm saying? Or in common terms, cheating. You don't want to be cheated on. You know what I'm saying? And if you don't want to be cheated on and want to be in a monogamous relationship, that is conservative thinking. Because a liberal way of thinking would be having an open relationship and being in agreement of sharing the person that you supposedly love with other people in some form of intimate, physical intimacy, sexually, to be most specific. So there is conservatism in even the most extreme liberals to say that. You know what I'm saying? or they choose to not be around or gather with extreme. Oh, let's just stop that. Let's just cut it right there and leave it at that point. Because I really want to get into these terms before we start to become too over-invested into our opening monologue. And we have a good amount of reading to do, and I want to cover this in less than an hour. So let me take a quick sip of water and let's go over some terminology out of my binder of notes. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going to open it up for y'all. I can't reach over, but trust me, there's a lot of notes that I typed and I printed out, and I have my equipment with my hole puncher, my awesome printer, a Epson 4830 series, if I'm correct. And, it's an awesome printer. And I had to get something more economy based or business oriented instead of home oriented because of the amount of information that we are going to be covering moving forward, because this ain't going to stop. You know what I'm saying? This is just going to keep going, except I am sharing in these days and being more of a master student teacher as opposed to just a simple student or master student of this information. So let's start with conservatism. Conservatism is a cultural, social, and political philosophy and ideology that seeks to promote and preserve traditional institutions, customs, and values. The central tenets of conservatism may vary in relation to the culture and civilization in which it appears, which basically states that depending on the specific culture, conservatism can be defined differently or understood or followed through differently in different environments, because conservatism, as much as it is a specific term, the differences of how you would relate to your specific ideology, which is conservative, would differ. You know what I'm saying? Because everybody has different viewpoints, feelings, and opinions. So there would be different versions of what someone would label a conservative mind state. In Western culture, depending on the particular nation, conservatives seek to promote and preserve a range of institutions, such as the nuclear family, which is the undivorced family, the complete family unit. Organized religion, the military, the nation state, property rights, rule of law, aristocracy, and monarchy. And let's look up aristocracy. For all of our listeners. Aristocracy, the highest class in certain societies, especially those holding hereditary titles or offices. Sounds familiar, right? Now, a monarch is just a simple king or queen rulership, and then you have offspring, children, which are passed on those titles through entitlement. Libertarianism. Libertarianism, from French, is a political philosophy that holds freedom, personal sovereignty, personal sovereignty, and liberty as primary values. Many libertarians believe that the concept of freedom is in accord with the non-aggression principle, nonviolence, according to which each individual has the right to live as they choose, instead of being forced to live a specific way, which would be conservatism, which is living within extreme restrictions. As long as they do not violate the rights of others by initiating force or fraud against them. Libertarians advocate the expansion of individual autonomy and political self-determination, emphasizing the principles of equality before the law and the protection of civil rights, including the rights to freedom of choice. They generally support individual liberty and oppose authority, state power, warfare, militarism, and nationalism. But some libertarians diverge on the scope and nature of their opposition to existing economic and political systems. Political systems. Let's speak on these political systems, shall we? So, in this common time, we know of two-party systems. The Democratic Party, which is considered the left, and the Republican Party, which is considered the right. That's always been American. Absolutely true and not true at the same time. It's an oxymoron. Well, Mr. Sensei Fouché, explain a little further what you mean. Gladly, I will. George Washington is the only president ever to sit in office that has not been affiliated with either party. We could label him independent. There wasn't even a party system when this Constitution and this state was recognized as far as the country of America. You know what I'm saying? Like, George Washington was elected amongst his peers to be the first leader. And he could have served out terms until he died. But realistically, what he did is that after his second term, he stepped down. He didn't want to be considered or following in the monarchy system that they just wound up revolutionizing against. You know what I'm saying? Because they wound up gaining their revolution away from Britain. And Britain was run by kings and had queens. They actually had a monarchy system of government. But he was like, nah, I don't want to do all of that. I'm going to, try to practice this liberty and this newfound freedom and the laws of this Constitution that we instilled. I want to be greater beyond where we were before, and I am going to lead by first example. During his, I almost want to say his second term, but it could have been somewhere within the first and second term. There was a lot of division within the cabinet. His political cabinet, there was beef, simply put. Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, to be most referencing into specific people that disagreed with the other side, which was like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. They didn't agree. I want to say that Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State. He was the first Secretary of State. And Alexander Hamilton was the Secretary of the Treasury. And they did not get along. You know what I'm saying? Now, during the Revolution from Britain, they all agreed in same principle to break away from Britain. But, certain individuals didn't think that we really needed, or the states, or the colonies, to be most specific, needed to be totally free from British control. They just wanted, a lot of the strict taxes that was being enforced to be lightened up. And those individuals started following the Federalist Party. So the Federalists were more in line with trying to keep agreement with Britain. Thomas Jefferson spent a lot of time assisting and guiding, as well as witnessing, the French Revolution. You know what I'm saying? So he was more in accord with French ideals and liberation. You know what I'm saying? So then he created what we know or what was known as the Democratic Republican Party, or the Jeffersonian Republican Party. So let's get into some reading. The Federalist Party. The Federalist Party was a conservative and nationalist American political party and the first political party in the United States. It dominated the national government under Alexander Hamilton from 1789 to 1801. The party was defeated by the Democratic Republican Party in 1800, and it became a minority party while keeping its stronghold in New England, which is a territory of more than a few states. And I'm not going to name them right now, but in that far northeast corner with Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. Those are the New England territories. It was a brief resurgence. It made a brief resurgence by opposing the War of 1812, then collapsed with its last presidential candidate in 1816. Remnants lasted for a few years afterwards. The party appealed to businesses who favored banks, national over state government, and maintaining an army and navy. In world affairs, the party preferred Great Britain and strongly opposed involvement in the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. The party favored centralization, federalism, modernization, industrialization, and protectionism. The Federalists called for a strong national government that promoted economic growth and fostered friendly relationships with Great Britain in opposition to revolutionary France. The Federalist Party came into being between 1789 and 1790 as a national coalition of bankers and businessmen in support of Hamilton's fiscal policies. These supporters worked in every state to build an organized party committed to a fiscally sound and nationalistic government. The only Federalist president was John Adams. George Washington, or excuse me, let me take a sip of water. I'm starting to dry out. George Washington was broadly sympathetic to the Federalist program, but he remained officially nonpartisan during his entire presidency. The Federalist Party controlled the national government until 1801, when it was overwhelmed by the Democratic Republican opposition led by President Thomas Jefferson. So the Federalists, once they died off and the Democratic Republican Party was extremely dominant, eventually a new rival had to pop up, because then there was a bunch of offsprings or, related ideologies or parties that sprung off from the demise of the Federalists. But eventually they wound up consolidating and becoming what we know as the GOP, the good old party, those Republicans. The Republican Party, also known as the Grand Old Party, is a right-wing political party in the United States. One of the two major parties, it emerged as the main rival of the Democratic Party in the 1850s. And the two parties have dominated American politics since then. The Republican Party was founded in 1854 by anti-slavery activists opposing the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the expansion of slavery into U.S. territories. It rapidly gained support in the North, drawing in former Whigs and Free Soilers, which were two other parties which sprung off of what used to be the Federalist Party. Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860 led to the secession of Southern states and the outbreak of the American Civil War. Under Lincoln and the Republican-controlled Congress, the party led efforts to preserve the Union, defeated the Confederacy, and abolished slavery. During the Reconstruction era, Republicans sought to extend civil rights protections to freed men, but by the late 1870s, the party shifted its focus toward business interests and industrial expansion. Just basically left the whole slavery deal and pushed it to the side. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it dominated national politics, promoting protective tariffs, infrastructure development, and laissez-faire economic policies, while navigating internal divisions between progressive and conservative factions. The party's support declined during the Great Depression, as the New Deal coalition reshaped American politics. Republicans returned to national power with the 1952 election of Dwight D. Eisenhower, whose moderate conservatism reflected a pragmatic acceptance of many New Deal-era programs. Following the Civil Rights era, the Republican Party's use of the Southern strategy appealed to many white voters disaffected by Democratic support for civil rights. The 1980 election of Ronald Reagan marked a major realignment, consolidating a coalition of free market advocates, social conservatives, and foreign policy hawks. Since 2009, internal divisions have grown, leading to a shift toward right-wing populism, which ultimately became its dominant faction. This culminated in the 2016 election of Donald Trump, whose leadership style and political agenda, often referred to as Trumpism, reshaped the party's identity. By the 2020s, the party has increasingly shifted towards a liberalism. And let me look that up right quick. A liberalism. A liberalism refers to the opposition to or lack of liberalism, especially political liberalism. It is associated with policies, actions, or behaviors that restrict freedom of thought or behavior, often going against principles of liberalism such as individual liberty, free speech, and equality. In the 21st century, the Republican Party's strongest demographics are rural voters, white Southerners, evangelical Christians, men, senior citizens, and voters without college degrees. On economic issues, the party has maintained a pro-capital attitude since its inception. It currently supports Trump's mercantilist policies, including tariffs on imports on all countries at the highest rates in the world, while opposing globalization and free trade. It also supports low income taxes and deregulation while opposing labor unions, a public health insurance, restricting abortion, supports tough on crime policies such as capital punishment and the prohibition of recreational drug use, promotes gun ownership and easing gun restrictions, and opposes transgender rights. Views on immigration within the party vary, though it generally supports limited legal immigration, but strongly opposes illegal immigration and favors the deportation of those without permanent legal status, such as undocumented immigrants and those with temporary protected status. In foreign policy, the party supports U.S. aid to Israel, but it's divided on aid to Ukraine and improving relations with Russia. With Trump's ascent empowering an isolationist America First foreign policy agenda. So let's go into this initial Democratic Republican Party. The Democratic Republican Party, known at the time as the Republican Party, also referred to by historians as the Jeffersonian Republican Party, was an American political party founded by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison in the early 1790s. It championed liberalism, republicanism, individual liberty, equal rights, separation of church and state, freedom of religion, anti-clericalism, emancipation of religious minorities, decentralization, free markets, free trade, and agrarianism. In foreign policy, it was hostile to Great Britain and in sympathy with the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars. The party became increasingly dominant after the 1800 elections as the opposing Federalist Party collapsed. Increasing dominance over American politics led to increasing factional splits within the party. Old Republicans, led by John Taylor of Caroline and John Randall of Roanoke, believed that the administrations of Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe and the Congress led by Henry Clay had in some ways betrayed the Republican principles of 1798 by expanding the size and scope of the national government. The Republicans splintered during the 1824 presidential election, those calling for a return to the older founding principles of the party were often referred to as Democratic Republicans, later Democrats, while those embracing the newer nationalist principles, the American system, were often referred to as National Republicans, which is later the Whigs. The Republican Party originated in Congress to oppose the nationalist and economically interventionist policies of Alexander Hamilton, who served as Secretary of the Treasury under President George Washington. The Republicans, as the opposing Federalist Party, each became more cohesive during Washington's second term, partly as a result of the debate over the Jay Treaty. Though he was defeated by Federalist John Adams in the 1796 presidential election, Jefferson and his Republican allies came into power following the 1800 elections, as President Jefferson presided over a reduction in the national debt and government spending and completed the Louisiana Purchase with France. Madison succeeded Jefferson as president in 1809 and led the country during the largely inconclusive War of 1812 with Great Britain. After the war, Madison and his congressional allies established the Second Bank of the United States and implemented protective tariffs, making a move away from the party's earlier emphasis on states' rights and a strict construction of the United States Constitution. The Federalists collapsed after 1815, beginning a period known as the Era of Good Feelings. Lacking in effective opposition, the Republicans split into rival groups after the 1824 presidential election. One faction supported President John Quincy Adams and became known as the NRP, the National Republican Party, which later merged into the Whig Party, while another faction, one that believed in Jeffersonian democracy, backed General Andrew Jackson and became the Democratic Party. Republicans were deeply committed to the principles of republicanism, which they feared were threatened by aristocratic tendencies of the Federalists. During the 1790s, the party strongly opposed Federalist programs, including the National Bank. After the War of 1812, Madison and many other party leaders came to accept the need for a national bank and federally funded infrastructure projects. In foreign affairs, the party advocated Western expansion and tended to favor France over Britain. Though the party's pro-French stance faded after Napoleon took power, the Democratic Republicans were strongest in the South and the Western frontier and weakest in New England. So we're going to go into our Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is a center-left political party in the United States, one of the major parties of the U.S. It was founded in 1828, making it the world's oldest active political party. Its main rival since the 1850s has been the Republican Party, and the two have since dominated American politics. It initially supported Jacksonian democracy, agrarianism, and geographical expansionism, while opposing a national bank and high tariffs. And I know I said agrarianism a couple of times. So let's go into agrarianism. Agrarianism is similar to, but not identical with, the Back to the Land movement. Agrarianism concentrates on the fundamental goods of the earth, on communities of more limited economic and political scale than in modern society, and on simple living, even when the shift involves questioning the progressive character of some recent social and economic developments. Thus, agrarianism is not industrial farming, with its specification on products and industrial scale. Democrats won 6 of the 8 presidential elections from 1828 to 1856, losing twice to the Whigs. In 1860, the party split into northern and southern factions over slavery. The party remained dominated by agrarian interests, contrasting with Republican support for big business of the Gilded Age. Contrasting with Republican support for the big business of the Gilded Age. And I had to repeat that so I could have been most clear. Democratic candidates won the presidency only twice between 1860 and 1908, which is basically the height of what we know as the Industrial Revolution. You know, the end of the 1800s going into the 1900s, even though the Republicans still dominated in those early 1900s before we got into the Great Depression. I've read that already. Democratic candidates won the presidency only twice between 1860 and 1908, though they won the popular vote 2 more times in that period. During the Progressive era, some factions of the party supported progressive reforms, with Woodrow Wilson being elected president in 1912 and 1916. In 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected president after campaigning on a strong response to the Great Depression. His New Deal programs created a broad Democratic coalition which united white Southerners, Northern workers, labor unions, African Americans, Catholic and Jewish communities, progressives, and liberals. From the late 1930s, a conservative minority in the party's southern wing joined with Republicans to slow and stop further progressive domestic reforms. After the Civil Rights Movement and Great Society era of progressive legislation under Lyndon B. Johnson, who was often able to overcome the conservative coalition in the 1960s, many white Southerners switched to the Republican Party as the northeastern states became more All right, slow down. After the Civil Rights Movement and Great Society era of progressive legislation under Lyndon B. Johnson, who was often able to overcome the conservative coalition in the 1960s, many white Southerners switched to the Republican Party as the northeastern states became more reliably Democratic. The party's labor union element has weakened since the 1970s amid deindustrialization, and during the 1980s, it lost many white working class voters to the Republicans under Ronald Reagan. The election of Bill Clinton in 1992 marked a shift for the party towards centrism and the third way, shifting its economic stance toward market-based policies. Barack Obama oversaw the party's passage of the Affordable Care Act in 2010. In the 21st century, the Democratic Party's strongest demographics are urban voters, college graduates, especially those with graduate degrees, African Americans, women, younger voters, irreligious voters, the unmarried, and LGBTQ people. On social issues, it advocates for abortion rights, LGBTQ rights, action on climate change, and the legalization of marijuana. On economic issues, the party favors health care reform, paid sick leave, paid family leave, and supporting unions. In foreign policy, the party supports liberal internationalism as well as tough stances against China and Russia, who are supposed to be communist. So, how did this flip flop become with the political beliefs of the party? And the way that I've studied this, there is one individual particularly that held such a strong resolve within the Congress of government in the late 1940s, 50s, all of the 1950s, 60s. I mean, going all the way up until his death in 2003. James Strom Thurmond. Mr. James Strom Thurmond, a very important person in my studies as to how and why this Republican Party operates the way it does today. Because they say that Lincoln freed the slaves. I mean, not realistically, it was a business decision, but just in common term, he was the president that signed the emancipation laws which freed the slaves. You know what I'm saying? So they say that Lincoln freed the slaves. The Republicans were responsible for relieving slavery from African Americans away from the oppressive Democratic South. But now, the Democrats favor, minorities, and the Republicans so-called favor the majority, which are the business people, the people with money. How did this flip-flop? Again, James Strom Thurmond. And we're just about at the end of our conversation. Let me read about James Strom Thurmond, and you could do a lot more research into all of this if and when you choose. Or don't, you know what I'm saying? Just remain dumb because Trump loves the uneducated, you know what I'm saying? Because they easily susceptible and able to be manipulated. James Strom Thurmond Sr. was an American politician who represented South Carolina. And my dad's family is rooted in South Carolina. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, he was an American politician who represented South Carolina in the United States Senate from 1954 to 2003. Before his 47 years as a senator, he served as the 103rd governor of South Carolina from 1947 to 1951. Thurmond was officially a member of the Democratic Party in the Senate until 1964. Why? He joined the Republican Party. He had earlier run for president in 1948 as the Dixiecrat candidate. There used to be a Dixiecrat party. And anybody that's not familiar with the term Dixie, think of that Confederate flag. That's the Dixie flag. So he ran for president in 1948 as the Dixiecrat candidate in opposition to Democratic President Harry S. Truman, receiving over 1 million votes and winning 4 states. A staunch opponent of civil rights legislation in the 1950s and 1960s, Thurmond completed the longest single-person Senate filibuster at that time until Jeffries, just a couple of months ago, if I'm correct, he broke the record. But at the time, Thurman completed the longest single person Senate filibuster at 24 hours and 18 minutes in length, in opposition to the Civil Rights Act of 1957. In 1960, Thurman voted against both the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. An extremely prejudicial and bigoted person. Despite his support for Jim Crow laws, Thurman denied the accusation that he was a racist by insisting he was a supporter of states' rights and an opponent of excessive federal authority. Thurman switched parties ahead of the 1964 United States presidential election, saying that the Democratic Party no longer represented people like him, and endorsed Republican nominee Barry Goldwater, who also opposed the Civil Rights Act. By the 1970s, Thurman started to moderate. He started to moderate his stance on race. And it probably had to do with money and votes. But continued to defend his prior support for segregation. He continued to defend his prior support for segregation based on states' rights in Southern society at the time. They didn't want to never give up the emancipation or slavery in the first place. And then they also didn't want the Jim Crow laws to drop to where we had to share space legally. The dilemma of democracy versus republic. With Thurman's party switch, he became the first Republican U.S. Senator from South Carolina since John J. Patterson left office in 1879. So all of these red states used to be blue. And the enemy to all liberals used to be the blue. The blue, the Democrats, right? The Republicans, the red, were the good guys, and the blue, the Democrats, were the bad guys. You know what I'm saying? And now the whole thing flipped to where now the red are the bad guys, or the red are the bad guys, and the blue are the good guys. But the blue used to be the bad guys, and the red was the good guys. Now it all flip-flopped. James Strom Thurmond. And that completes our reading for today. So really rewind, itemize through my notes, go through my references, look all this stuff up. You know what I'm saying? This is the age of information. Nothing is really hidden. If you really want to know something, you just go on your phone. You don't even have to have a desktop computer like I do, as well as a laptop. I have my desktop, I have my laptop, I have my my notepad, as well as my phone. You know what I'm saying? Everybody has a phone. Go onto your Google search and look all this stuff up. You know what I'm saying? But on that note, let me end this program because we're going into an extremely lengthy recording. But there was a lot of itemized information and we was able to get through it. So let me end by stating, this is your neighborhood Sensei Fouché. And I always strongly suggest before emphatically imploring for all of you beautiful, wonderful, self-loving, worthy individuals to stay woke. Don't let them put you to sleep because then you're susceptible to be controlled, you know what I'm saying, and manipulated. So never get all stressed out. You know what I'm saying? Make sure you take all necessary meditative practices and procedures to relax. And always be prepared to take those notes. And we're going to have a segment coming up. Whenever was America great? Look out for that. This was an introduction going into that conversation. You know what I'm saying? And this is going to be multiple episodes. And we're still going to do our mental health studies because that is the most important thing. What I was telling a young lady today is that, you know, the mental health studies have been extremely helpful from a therapeutic standpoint because knowing all of these social issues and news that has arisen and that's going on, all of that is important. And it's easy to be overly stressed out and highly anxious because a lot of this injustice that is being practiced and authorized. You know what I'm saying? But when you're aware of what's going on and how to think and how to adjust, adaptability, you know what I'm saying? Because it's either adapt or die. But once you got all of that in place, then as frustrating as it is, you're most notable and psychologically in place to be able to process forward despite the social struggles in this existing society. So be smooth in unity. 1.